Maria had always known she was different from her siblings. While her brothers and sisters ran around the small apartment, laughing and playing, she preferred reading books in the corner. Her parents, Roberto and Elena, worked double shifts at the local factory just to keep food on the table. Money was always tight, but there was love in their little home. That changed everything on a rainy Tuesday evening in March. Maria was coming home from her job at the grocery store when a drunk driver ran a red light. The impact sent her car spinning into a concrete barrier. When she woke up 3 weeks later in the hospital, the doctors delivered news that shattered her world. She would never walk again. The medical bills started piling up immediately. Roberto stared at the numbers on the hospital statements, his hands shaking. $40,000 for the surgery. Another $20,000 for the extended stay. The insurance covered some of it, but not nearly enough. Elena cried quietly in the hospital hallway, knowing they would lose their house. Maria tried to stay positive those first few weeks. She learned to use the wheelchair, went to physical therapy, and even managed to smile when visitors came. But deep down, she could see the strain in her parents' eyes. She heard the whispered arguments late at night about money, about space, about how they would manage. Their apartment was on the second floor with no elevator. Roberto's back gave out trying to carry Maria up the stairs every day. Elena had to quit one of her jobs to help with daily care. The family's savings disappeared within 2 months. They sold the car, then Elena's wedding ring, then anything else of value they could find. Maria's youngest brother, Diego, was only 8 years old. He started asking why his sister couldn't come to his school plays anymore, why she looked sad all the time, why Mommy and Daddy were always worried. The other children, Teresa and Miguel Jr., began to resent the attention Maria needed. Family dinners became tense, silent affairs. The breaking point came 6 months after the accident. Maria developed a serious infection that required constant monitoring. The home nurse visits cost $200 each time. Roberto was working 16-hour days but still couldn't keep up with the expenses. Elena had dark circles under her eyes from staying awake all night, checking on Maria every hour. One evening, Maria overheard her parents talking in the kitchen. Elena was sobbing, saying they couldn't afford the medicine Maria needed. Roberto was angry, frustrated, talking about selling the apartment and moving everyone into a single room somewhere. Then Elena said the words that broke Maria's heart. Maybe she would be better off in a state facility. Maria pretended to be asleep when her mother came to check on her that night. But inside, she was dying. She knew her family loved her, but she also knew she was destroying their lives. Every day she stayed meant less food for Diego, fewer clothes for Teresa, more stress for everyone. The next morning, Roberto came into her room with a forced smile. "Honey, we found a new place that can help you. It's a special facility with better equipment than we have here." Maria wanted to believe him, but something in his voice felt wrong. His eyes wouldn't meet hers. Elena packed a small bag of Maria's clothes, moving slowly like she was in a dream. She kept stopping to wipe her eyes. The family gathered around Maria's wheelchair in the living room, but nobody knew what to say. Diego hugged her tight and whispered that he would miss her. Teresa and Miguel Jr. stood awkwardly by the door. Roberto lifted Maria into their old pickup truck, the same one they'd had since she was a teenager. Elena sat in the back with her, holding her hand but not speaking. As they drove through town, Maria noticed they weren't heading toward any of the medical facilities she knew about. They were driving toward the edge of town, where the houses got smaller and farther apart. "Dad, where exactly is this place?" Maria asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Roberto cleared his throat but didn't answer. Elena squeezed her hand tighter, and Maria felt tears dropping onto her arm. They drove for another 20 minutes into the countryside. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. Under different circumstances, Maria might have thought it was beautiful. But now, each mile felt like they were driving away from everything she'd ever known. Finally, Roberto pulled over next to what looked like an old, empty building. There were no signs, no cars, no people around. Just broken windows and weeds growing through cracks in the parking lot. Maria's heart started pounding. This doesn't look like a medical facility, Dad. Her voice was small now, scared. Roberto got out of the truck and walked around to the passenger side. His hands were shaking as he lifted Maria into her wheelchair. Elena was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it anymore. Maria, honey, Roberto's voice cracked as he spoke. We can't do this anymore. We've tried everything, but we're losing. The apartment? The kids need food, clothes, school supplies. We're destroying the whole family trying to take care of you. The words hit Maria like a physical blow. She looked around at the empty building, the deserted road, and finally understood what was happening. Her own family was leaving her here. Alone. Please don't do this, she whispered. I'll find a way to help. I can get a job, even in this chair. I can figure something out. Elena knelt down beside the wheelchair, her face wet with tears. We love you so much, baby girl. But we don't know what else to do. Maybe someone will find you, someone who can help better than we can. Roberto was already walking back to the truck, his shoulders shaking. He couldn't look at Maria again. Mom, please, Maria reached out, but Elena was already standing up, stepping away. I'm sorry, Elena whispered. I'm so sorry. They got back in the truck and drove away, leaving Maria sitting alone in her wheelchair as darkness fell around her. She watched the taillights disappear around a bend in the road, taking with them the only family she'd ever known. The evening air was cold and getting colder. Maria pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders and tried to figure out what to do next. Her phone was dead. She had no money, no food, and no idea where she was. Cars passed by occasionally, but none of them stopped as the hours passed. Maria began to understand that this might be how her story ended. Not with a dramatic accident or a hospital bed surrounded by flowers, but alone on a dark road, abandoned by the people who were supposed to love her most. She thought about Diego's hug, Elena's tears, Roberto's shaking hands. They hadn't wanted to leave her. But sometimes love isn't enough to overcome impossible circumstances. Sometimes families break under pressure they never asked for. Maria closed her eyes and tried to remember better days, when she was little and the family would pile into this same truck for trips to the lake. When Roberto would carry her on his shoulders and Elena would pack sandwiches for everyone. When being together was all they needed to be happy, now she was alone and the cold was seeping into her bones. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice told her this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the end of one chapter, and maybe, somehow, another one was about to begin. The rain had been falling for hours when David finally finished his business meeting in town. It was nearly midnight, and the winding country road back to his ranch was dark and slippery. David had made this drive hundreds of times over the past 5 years. Ever since he'd taken over running the family cattle operation after his father's heart attack at 34, David was known throughout the county as a fair but private man. He owned the largest ranch for miles around with over 8,000 acres of prime grazing land. Most people respected him, but few really knew him. Ever since his wife Catherine had died from cancer 3 years ago, David had thrown himself into work, rarely socializing or spending time in town unless absolutely necessary. Tonight's meeting had been about expanding his cattle operation, something Catherine had always encouraged him to do. The banker had approved the loan, and David should have been celebrating. Instead, he felt the familiar emptiness that had settled in his chest since Catherine's funeral. Success felt hollow when you had nobody to share it with. As his truck rounded a familiar bend in the road, David's headlights swept across something that made him slam on the brakes. There, sitting in a wheelchair beside what looked like an abandoned building, was a young woman. At first, David thought his tired eyes were playing tricks on him. Who would be out here at this hour, especially in this weather? He pulled over and grabbed a flashlight from his glove compartment. As he approached, he could see the woman more clearly. She was probably in her mid-20s, with long dark hair plastered to her head from the rain. Her lips had a blue tinge, and she was shivering uncontrollably. Most alarming of all, she seemed barely conscious. Ma'am, can you hear me? David knelt down beside the wheelchair, trying to shield her from the rain with his jacket. Maria's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. She tried to speak but only managed a weak whisper, cold ... So cold ... David quickly assessed the situation. This woman was in serious trouble. She was showing clear signs of hypothermia, and God only knew how long she'd been sitting out here. The nearest hospital was 20 minutes away, but every minute counted. I'm going to help you, okay? I'm going to get you somewhere warm. David was already lifting Maria from the wheelchair, surprised by how light she felt. She was soaked through, and her skin felt like ice. He carried her to his truck and cranked up the heat as high as it would go. Maria was drifting in and out of consciousness, mumbling words he couldn't understand. David found a blanket behind his seat and wrapped it around her before speeding toward Millbrook General Hospital. During the drive, David kept glancing over at Maria, worried she might stop breathing. He'd seen hypothermia before in cattle during harsh winters, and he knew how quickly it could become deadly. "Stay with me," he kept saying. "We're almost there." At the hospital, David carried Maria through the emergency room doors, shouting for help. The medical staff immediately took over, wheeling her into a treatment room. David found himself pacing in the waiting area, his clothes still damp from the rain, wondering what had happened to this woman and how she'd ended up alone on that dark road. Dr. Patricia Chun emerged an hour later with an update. "She's stable now, but it was close. Another hour in those conditions and we might have lost her. Her core body temperature was dangerously low, and she was severely dehydrated." "Will she be okay?" David asked. "Physically, yes, but Mr. Dr. Chin paused, realizing she didn't know David's name. "Wellington, David Wellington." "Mr. Wellington, can you tell me how you know this patient? We found no identification, and she hasn't been coherent enough to give us information." David explained how he'd found Maria, watching Dr. Chin's expression grow more concerned. "So you're saying she was just sitting there alone? In a wheelchair? At midnight?" "That's right. There was no car, no other people around." "Just her," Dr. Chun frowned. "That's very strange. People don't just end up in wheelchairs in the middle of nowhere without some kind of explanation. We'll need to contact the police and social services. Can I see her?" David asked. Dr. Chun hesitated. "Are you family?" "No, but I'm the one who found her. I just want to make sure she's okay." Something in David's voice must have convinced the doctor, because she nodded. "Room 247, but she might not be awake yet." David walked down the sterile hospital hallway, memories flooding back of all the time he'd spent in similar corridors when Catherine was sick. He promised himself he'd never set foot in another hospital if he could help it. Yet here he was. Maria was awake when he entered the room, staring at the ceiling with a blank expression. She turned her head when she heard his footsteps, and David was struck by how young she looked. Her dark eyes held a depth of sadness that reminded him of his own reflection in the months after Catherine's death. "How are you feeling?" David asked softly, taking a seat in the chair beside her bed. "Better, thank you." Maria's voice was hoarse, but steady. "The nurse said you found me. That you brought me here." David nodded. "I was driving home from a meeting. Lucky I came along when I did." Maria was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. David could see her trying to decide how much to tell him. Finally, she spoke. "I don't have anyone to call." "No one who would come get me? What about your family?" Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. "It's complicated." David recognized that look. It was the same expression he'd worn when people asked him about moving on after Catherine's death. Some pain was too fresh, too? Raw to put into words. "You don't have to explain anything," David said. "But you can't just go back out there. Where will you go when they discharge you?" "I don't know," Maria admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. David found himself saying something he hadn't planned to say. "I have a ranch about 20 minutes from here. Big place, plenty of room. You could stay there while you figure things out." Maria stared at him in shock. "I'm sorry, what? You don't even know me. Why would you ... "Because everyone deserves help when they need it," David said simply. And because 3 years ago, strangers showed me kindness when I needed it most, maybe it's time I paid that forward. The truth was, David wasn't entirely sure why he was making this offer. All he knew was that seeing Maria alone and afraid had awakened something in him that had been dormant since Catherine's death. Maybe it was compassion, or maybe it was just the recognition of someone else's pain. I can't accept charity, Maria sighed, though David could hear the uncertainty in her voice. It's not charity. I could use help with the ranch books, and the place is too big for just one person anyway. You'd be doing me a favor. Maria was quiet again, weighing her options. David could see the fear in her eyes, the vulnerability of someone who'd been hurt badly and wasn't sure if she could trust again. Just until I can figure out what to do next, she finally said. However long you need, David replied as he drove. Home that night, David wondered what he'd gotten himself into. He'd lived alone on the ranch for 3 years, barely speaking to anyone except his ranch hands and the occasional business associate. Now he was bringing home a stranger, someone with secrets she wasn't ready to share, but for the first time since Catherine's funeral, David felt like he was doing something that mattered. Something that might help heal not just Maria's wounds, but maybe some of his own as well. Sometimes the best way to save yourself is to save someone else first. 2 days later, David pulled his truck up to the main house of Wellington Ranch. Maria sat quietly in the passenger seat, clutching a small bag containing the few belongings the hospital had given her. As they approached the sprawling property, her eyes widened at the sight before her. The ranch was massive. Rolling green pastures stretched as far as she could see, dotted with hundreds of cattle. The main house was a beautiful 2-story log structure with a wraparound porch, surrounded by several smaller buildings. Everything looked well-maintained and prosperous, a sharp contrast to the cramped apartment she'd grown up in. "This is all yours?" Maria asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "My family's been here for 4 generations, David said, parking near what looked like a guest house. "But yeah, I guess it's mine now." 3 ranch hands were working near the barn, and they stopped to stare as David helped Maria into her wheelchair. Maria felt their curious eyes on her and wished she could disappear. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not like this. The guest house was smaller than the main house, but still larger than anywhere Maria had ever lived. David had spent the past 2 days making modifications. He'd hired a contractor to install ramps at both entrances and had the bathroom completely redesigned with grab bars and a roll-in shower. "I hope this works for you," David said, opening the front door. "If you need anything changed, just let me know." Maria wheeled herself inside and gasped. The living room was spacious and bright, with large windows overlooking the pastures. Everything was on one level, and she could move around easily. There was a fully equipped kitchen, a comfortable bedroom, and that amazing bathroom David had mentioned. "This is too much," Maria said, tears forming in her eyes. "You've done too much." "It's nothing," David replied, though Maria could see the satisfaction in his eyes. "Are you hungry?" "My housekeeper, Betty, left some food in the refrigerator." Over the next few days, Maria began to settle into a routine. David would check on her each morning before heading out to work with the cattle. Betty, a kind woman in her 60s, would bring meals and stay to chat. The ranch hands, Joe, Tommy, and Carlos, were initially suspicious but gradually warmed up to her presence. Maria spent most of her time alone watching the ranch operations from her window. She'd never been around cattle before, and she found herself fascinated by the daily rhythm of ranch life. David worked from dawn until dusk, and she could see why he was so successful. He treated his animals well and his employees fairly, but the loneliness was crushing. Maria had too much time to think about her family, about the night they'd abandoned her. She replayed every moment in her mind, wondering if she could have done something different. The guilt ate at her. Her family was probably struggling without her disability payments, and here she was living in luxury she'd never dreamed of. One evening, David knocked on her door holding a box of papers. "I know you said you studied accounting in college," he said. "I was wondering if you might take a look at these books." My bookkeeper retired last month and I'm drowning in paperwork. Maria looked at the disorganized receipts and invoices spilling out of the box. Her accountant's brain immediately started organizing them into categories. "This is a mess," she said with a small smile. "Tell me about it. I've been putting off dealing with it, but tax season is coming." For the first time since the accident, Maria felt useful. She spent the next week diving into David's financial records, creating spreadsheets, and organizing everything by date and category. The work gave her purpose and helped quiet the negative thoughts that had been consuming her. "This is incredible," David said when she showed him her progress. "You've organized everything better than my old bookkeeper ever did." "How did you catch that error with the feed supplier?" "The invoices didn't match the delivery receipts," Maria explained. "They've been overcharging you for 3 months. That's $1,200 you can get back." David stared at the paperwork in amazement. "You found all this in 1 week?" Maria felt a flutter of pride. "I've always been good with numbers. My family used to joke that I could balance a checkbook in my sleep." The mention of her family made David's expression soften. "Do you want to talk about what happened? Why you were out there that night?" Maria's walls went up immediately. "It's not important." "It is to me," David said gently. "You don't have to tell me everything, but I can see you're carrying a heavy burden. Sometimes talking helps." For a moment, Maria considered opening up, but the shame was too great. How could she tell this generous man that her own family had thrown her away like garbage? How could she admit that the people who were supposed to love her most had decided she wasn't worth the trouble? "Maybe someday," she said finally. David didn't push, but Maria could see the concern in his eyes. Over the following weeks, he made subtle efforts to lift her spirits. He brought her books from town, installed a computer so she could work more efficiently, and even surprised her with a small television for her bedroom. The ranch hands began including her in their conversations when they took lunch breaks near the guest house. Joe, the oldest of the 3, had a daughter with cerebral palsy, and he shared stories about her accomplishments in adaptive sports. Tommy brought his guitar sometimes and played country songs on the porch. Carlos taught her Spanish phrases and laughed when she mispronounced them. Betty became like a mother figure, bringing not just meals but companionship. She'd lived on ranches her whole life and had stories about everything from cattle drives to wedding disasters. Her husband had died 5 years earlier, and she understood loneliness. "That boy needs someone around," Betty told Maria one afternoon while they folded laundry together. "He's been like a ghost since Catherine passed. Working all the time, never laughing, never really living. But since you've been here, I've seen glimpses of the old David." Maria looked out the window where David was working with a young calf that had been separated from its mother. He was patient and gentle, talking to the animal in a soft voice until it calmed down. "He saved my life," Maria said. "Maybe," Betty replied, "but maybe you're saving his too." The breakthrough came 6 weeks after Maria's arrival. She was working on the ranch's quarterly taxes when she discovered a significant discrepancy in the insurance payments. David had been paying for coverage on equipment that had been sold years ago, while newer equipment wasn't properly insured. When she showed David her findings, he was stunned. "This could have bankrupted us if we'd had a major claim," he said. "How did nobody catch this before?" "Sometimes you need fresh eyes," Maria said. "I think you should review all your contracts and insurance policies. There might be other problems." That evening, David appeared at her door with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "I think this calls for a celebration," he said. They sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The cattle were settling down for the night, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. "I can't remember the last time I felt this relaxed," David said. "It's beautiful here," Maria replied. "Peaceful." "It can be lonely too," David admitted. "After Catherine died, I thought about selling everything, moving to the city. But then I'd remember all the generations of my family who worked this land, and I couldn't do it." "What was she like?" Maria asked softly. David smiled, the first genuine smile Maria had seen from him. "She was like sunshine, always laughing, always finding the good in everything. She wanted to fill this place with children, have big family gatherings at holidays. She had it all planned out. I'm sorry you lost her. I'm sorry you lost your family too, David said quietly. Maria's breath caught. They'd never directly talked about her situation, but somehow David understood that she'd lost more than just her ability to walk. Sometimes I wonder if things happen for a reason, David continued. If maybe we both needed to find each other. As the stars began to appear overhead, Maria felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Maybe this ranch could be more than just a temporary refuge. Maybe, for the first time in her life, she'd found a place where she truly belonged. 6 months had passed since that cold night when David found Maria on the roadside. The shy, broken woman who had barely spoken above a whisper was slowly disappearing, replaced by someone stronger and more confident. Maria had thrown herself into managing the ranch's finances with a passion that surprised everyone. Including herself, every morning she would wheel herself to the main office in the barn, where David had set up a complete workspace for her. The old wooden desk was now covered with organized files, a new computer, and charts tracking everything from cattle prices to feed costs. What had once been David's biggest headache was now running like clockwork. "Maria, you've got to see this," David said one Tuesday morning, bursting into the office with a huge grin on his face. "That feed contract you renegotiated saved us $8,000 this quarter." Maria looked up from her computer screen, where she was analyzing profit margins on different cattle breeds. The supplier was charging premium prices for standard feed. "I just made sure we were getting what we paid for." "Just?" David laughed. "You've revolutionized how we do business here. Joe was telling me yesterday that ranchers 3 counties over are asking how we keep our costs so low." The truth was, Maria had discovered she had a natural talent for business that went far beyond basic accounting. She could spot inefficiencies that others missed, negotiate better deals with suppliers, and find ways to maximize profits without cutting corners on animal care. The ranch was more successful than it had been in decades, but the financial improvements were only part of Maria's transformation. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, the physical therapist David had hired, had been working with Maria 3 times a week. What started as basic exercises to prevent muscle deterioration had evolved into an intensive program that had Maria stronger than she'd been since before the accident. "I want to try the parallel bars again today," Maria announced during her Thursday session. Dr. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" "Last time was pretty tough, I'm sure," Maria said firmly. "I can feel my core getting stronger. I think I can do better this time." Using her arms and the power in her upper body, Maria pulled herself up to standing position between the parallel bars. Her legs couldn't support her weight, but she could hold herself upright for longer periods now. More importantly, she was learning to navigate the world from different positions, making her more independent than she'd ever thought possible. David often found excuses to be nearby during these sessions. He claimed he was checking on equipment or organizing tools, but everyone knew he was really there to offer quiet encouragement. When Maria managed to move 10 feet along the bars without stopping, David's proud smile was visible from across the barn. "You know," Dr. Rodriguez told David privately after one session, "I've worked with a lot of patients over the years. Most people in Maria's situation focus on what they've lost. She focuses on what she can still do. That's rare." The changes weren't just physical. Maria had started venturing beyond the ranch property, something she hadn't done since arriving. Betty had convinced her to attend the monthly community potluck at the local church, and despite her initial terror, Maria found herself enjoying the social interaction. You should have seen the look on Pastor Wilson's face when Maria corrected his math about the church fundraiser, Betty told David, chuckling as she prepared dinner. He'd been struggling with the budget for weeks, and she figured it out in 5 minutes. Word of Maria's skills spread quickly through the small community. Soon, other local ranchers and business owners were asking for her help with their books. What started as small favors turned into a legitimate side business, with Maria working as a financial consultant for 6 operations in the area. "I never imagined I'd be running my own business," Maria told David one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Especially not from a wheelchair. Why especially not from a wheelchair? David asked. Maria was quiet for a moment, considering his question. I guess I thought my life was over when I couldn't walk anymore. Like everything I could do was tied to my legs. That's understandable, David said. But you're the smartest person I know. That brain of yours works just fine, wheelchair or no wheelchair. Their friendship had deepened into something neither of them had expected. David found himself looking forward to their evening conversations more than anything else in his day. Maria had become his closest confidant, the person he shared his worries and dreams with. She knew about his fears of not living up to his father's legacy, his struggle with loneliness, and his growing uncertainty about staying on the ranch. Maria, in turn, had begun opening up about her life before the accident. She told David about her love of reading, her college dreams, and her hopes of someday traveling. But there was still one topic she avoided completely: her family. The subject came up unexpectedly. On a warm Saturday in October, David had convinced Maria to come with him to the county fair, something she'd been nervous about but ultimately enjoyed. They were sharing a funnel cake when Maria spotted a familiar figure across the crowded fairgrounds. "Oh no," she whispered. Her face going pale, David followed her gaze and saw a man in his 50s talking to one of the game operators. The man had the same dark hair and eyes as Maria, and there was something about his posture that seemed familiar. "Who is that?" David asked. "My brother," Maria said quietly. "Miguel?" David watched as the man continued his conversation, seemingly unaware of their presence. "Do you want to go say hello?" "No," Maria said quickly. "Please, can we just leave?" They made their way back to David's truck, but not before Miguel noticed them. David saw the man's eyes widen with recognition, then narrow with what looked like calculation. Miguel started walking in their direction, but David quickly helped Maria into the truck and drove away. "Want to tell me what that was about?" David asked gently as they headed home. Maria was quiet for several miles. Finally, she spoke. "My family thinks I'm dead. They left me to die, and I'm sure they assume that's what happened." "Left you to die?" David's knuckles went white as he gripped the steering wheel. The whole story came pouring out. Maria told David about the mounting medical bills, her family's financial desperation, and that terrible night when her parents had abandoned her by the roadside. She spoke about the guilt she felt for being a burden, and the shame of being unwanted by the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. "They didn't have a choice," Maria said, though her voice wavered. "The medical bills were destroying the whole family. Maybe they thought someone would find me and take better care of me than they could." David pulled over to the side of the road and turned to face her. "Maria, there's always a choice. There are programs, resources, family services. They chose the easy way out and it nearly killed you." "But David, you don't understand how poor we were." "I don't care how poor they were," David said firmly. "You don't abandon family, ever, period." That night, Maria cried for the first time since arriving at the ranch. All the emotions she'd been holding back came flooding out: the hurt, the anger, the confusion, and yes, even the love she still felt for her family despite everything. David held her as she sobbed, his own heart breaking for what she'd endured. "I keep wondering if I'll ever see them again," Maria whispered. "And I don't know if I want to or not." "Whatever happens," David said, "you're not alone anymore. This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be." But David had a sinking feeling that Maria's past wasn't finished with her yet. Miguel had seen them together, had seen Maria living well and thriving. In a small community like theirs, word traveled fast. It was only a matter of time before the rest of Maria's family learned where she was, and David wasn't sure either of them was ready for that confrontation. 3 weeks after the county fair incident, Maria was working in the ranch office when she heard unfamiliar voices outside. Through the window, she saw a beat-up sedan parked near the main house, and her heart nearly stopped. She recognized that car. It was the same one her family had driven to church every Sunday when she was growing up. Roberto and Elena stepped out of the vehicle, looking around nervously at the sprawling ranch. They were dressed in their best clothes, but Maria could see they looked older, more worn down than she remembered. Behind them came Miguel, Teresa, and Diego. Her little brother was now 11, taller and more serious-looking than the 8-year-old who had hugged her goodbye. Maria's hands shook as she reached for her phone to call David, but before she could dial, the office door opened. Roberto stepped inside, his hat in his hands, looking embarrassed and uncomfortable. "Hello, Maria," he said quietly in Spanish. You look healthy. What are you doing here?" Maria's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Miguel told us he saw you at the fair. We've been looking for you since that night." Roberto's eyes couldn't meet hers. "Looking for me?" Maria's voice rose. "You left me on the side of the road to die. You didn't look very hard." Elena appeared in the doorway, tears already streaming down her face. "Mia, we hoped someone would find you. Someone who could take better care of you than we could." "So you just drove away and forgot about me?" "We never forgot," Elena sobbed. "Not for a single day. We called hospitals, police stations, everywhere we could think of, but there was no record of you anywhere." David's truck pulled up outside, and Maria felt a wave of relief. She watched through the window as he got out, his expression darkening. When he saw the unfamiliar car and the people gathered near his office, "Who's that?" Roberto asked, noticing Maria's attention shift to the window. "That's David Wellington, the man who saved my life after you abandoned me." David entered the office, his presence immediately filling the small space. He was tall, confident, and clearly protective of Maria, the contrast between him and her. Shabby-looking family was stark. "Is everything all right here?" David asked, his voice polite but cold. "These are my parents and siblings," Maria said. "They were just visiting." Elena stepped forward, trying to smile through her tears. "You must be the kind man who helped our Maria. We can never thank you enough." "Your Maria?" David's voice was dangerously quiet. "That's interesting, because the Maria I know was left for dead on a country road 8 months ago." Roberto shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, you don't understand our situation. We were desperate. The medical bills, the children, we lost everything trying to take care of her. So you threw her away like garbage?" "David, please," Maria said softly. She could see the anger building in his eyes, and while part of her appreciated his protection, she needed to handle this herself. Miguel, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward. "Look, we know what we did was wrong. But we're here now, aren't we? We want to make things right." "Make things right?" David laughed bitterly. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Teresa, now 16 and trying to look grown-up, spoke up. "We know Maria's been living here on this big ranch. We know she's been working, making money. We thought maybe she could help the family now that she's doing better." The room went dead silent. Maria felt like she'd been slapped. They hadn't come to apologize or to check on her well-being. They'd come for money. "You want me to give you money?" Maria's voice was barely a whisper. Elena reached out toward her. "Daughter, Maria, you have to understand. Diego needs clothes for school. The apartment needs repairs. Your father hurt his back and can't work as much as he used to. And you think I owe you something?" Maria's voice was getting stronger, anger replacing the hurt. "After what you did to me?" "You're our daughter," Roberto said desperately. "Family helps family." David stepped closer to Maria's wheelchair, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "Family doesn't abandon each other on dark roads to die." "You don't understand," Elena cried. "We didn't have a choice. The doctors said she'd never walk again, never work again. We thought she'd be better off dead." David's voice was like ice. Maria looked at each of her family members, studying their faces. She could see the desperation there, the same look they'd worn that terrible night 8 months ago, but she could also see something else. Calculation. They weren't here out of love or concern. They were here because they thought she'd struck it rich. "How did you find me?" Maria asked. Miguel answered. "It wasn't hard. People in town talk. They say you work for the richest rancher in the county, that you live in his guest house, wear nice clothes, drive around in his fancy truck. They say you're his girlfriend now, Teresa added with a smirk. Living the good life while you're real. Family struggles. David's jaw tightened, but Maria held up her hand to stop him from responding. You want to know what the good life looks like? Maria said, her voice growing stronger with each word. It looks like learning to shower by yourself. When you can't feel your legs. It looks like building up enough strength to transfer from your wheelchair to a car without help. It looks like starting over completely with nothing but the kindness of a stranger. She wheeled herself closer to her family. It looks like working 14-hour days to prove you're worth something. It looks like going to a physical therapy 3 times a week, pushing through pain you can't imagine. It looks like crying yourself to sleep for months, wondering why the people who were supposed to love you most decided you weren't worth fighting for. Elena was sobbing now. Maria, please. I built this life from nothing, Maria continued. David didn't give me anything except a chance. Everything else, the business, the clients, the money, I earned that myself. With this brain that you thought was worthless because it was attached to legs that don't work. Roberto tried one more time. Maria, we're still your family. We made a mistake, but no, Maria said firmly. You made a choice and I'm making mine now. She turned to David. Could you please call the sheriff? I want them off the property. Maria, wait, Diego spoke for the first time, his young voice cracking. I missed you. I really did. I drew pictures of you and kept them under my bed. For a moment, Maria's resolve wavered. This was her baby brother, the one who used to crawl into her lap when he had nightmares. But then she remembered sitting alone in that wheelchair for hours, getting colder and colder, watching their taillights disappear. I missed you too, Diego. She said softly, but that doesn't change what they did. As the sheriff's car pulled up the driveway, Elena made one last desperate plea. Please, Maria, we're desperate. We've got nowhere else to turn. Maria looked at her mother for a long moment. You had somewhere to turn 8 months ago? You had family services, disability programs, community resources, but those would have required work, patience, commitment. It was easier to just throw me away. But we love you, Elena whispered. Love isn't something you say, Maria replied. It's something you do. And what you did was abandon your daughter when she needed you most. After the sheriff escorted her family off the property, Maria sat quietly on her porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. David sat beside her, not speaking, just being present. Do you think I was too harsh? Maria asked finally. I think you were perfect, David said. You stood up for yourself. You chose your own worth over their guilt. I keep thinking about Diego. He was just a kid when it happened. He still is just a kid, but he's not your responsibility anymore. You get to choose your own family now? Maria reached over and took David's hand. I already have. 6 months later, Maria stood at the altar of the small country church, wearing the white dress David had bought for her in the city. She couldn't walk down the aisle, but she didn't need to. David met her at the back of the church and walked beside her wheelchair as she rolled toward their future together. The church was packed with their friends, Betty, the ranch hands, Dr. Rodriguez, and dozens of community members whose lives Maria had touched through her business. These were the people who had become her real family, the ones who had chosen to love and support her not because they had to, but because they wanted to dot as they exchanged vows. Maria thought about that cold night when she'd thought her life was ending. She'd been wrong. It wasn't ending, it was just beginning. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads to the best thing that could ever happen. Maria had learned that real family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about the people who choose to stand by you when the world falls apart, who see your worth when you can't see it yourself, and who love you not despite your broken pieces, but because of how beautifully you've put them back together. The woman who had been left to die had done more than survive. She had learned to truly live.